How many of you know where California currently ranks on per student spending? I'm sure not many of you, it's not very talked about. However, as of today, California ranks 34 out of the 50 states in all of America on per student spending. However, how many can you guess on which state has the highest total revenue in all of America? It's California. According to Census.gov, California ranks with the highest state revenue at $133 billion compared to every other state. And the next closest state is New York. Today I would like to enlighten you as to why so many educators are leaving California and the potential harm that can come from this. I'm sure many of you in high school, if you remember back then, had issues where there was maybe 30 plus students in your history and your math classes, and there was not enough books to go around, and your teachers were always overwhelmed. You were not getting your stuff graded. It would take them weeks at a time because they had 6 classes with like 35 to 45 students, and they all had to do it on their own, and they're all expected to do it on their own. Today I would like to go into how the education budget is affecting educators in California, some of the frustrations that cause educators to quit within the first 5 years, and the potential harm this can cause to the California public education system. Okay, let's start with the budget. Okay, according to the New York Times, since the Great Recession started, there's been a budget cut in education in California of $5.8 billion. Now this might not seem, it's just a number, 5.8 billion. However, what this 5.8 billion means has been that ever since the Great Recession, teachers have been getting something called pink slips. And it's usually just you have the possibility of being laid off. However, since the Great Recession, if you got a pink slip, it was generally you're gone. It's time for you to quit. Or you're gonna be let off at the end of your year. So they're reducing teachers to an already massive population in California public education system. And this is the reason why a lot of you had to deal with your 30 to 40 plus classes, why you didn't have any supplies, and why your educator is so frustrated all the time, they're always complaining you might have something hurt. Another issue that came with budget cuts was when they were going to lay someone off, there was this issue of seniority. Now, according to scpr.org, kind of related to NPR, the state is putting teachers above students by using seniority, not teacher quality, to determine who gets laid off, by giving teachers of just 18 months permanent teaching status. Now, this was an issue during the Great Recession when educators are being laid off. Your job was pretty much determined not by your quality of teaching, but how long you've been teaching. And this is why a lot of educators today are really scared of getting into public education, the public sector, because they realize that there is no job security for them. You can just work for a year and be like, we don't need you anymore. We're going to get someone else. However, people who've been there for 10, 15 years, whether they're good educators or not, they tend to stay because they've been there for so long, and they feel like seniority is better than actual results. Lastly, I want to talk about, in regards to the budget, how property taxes come to this. This is California's breakdown. It's a little pie chart of California's state revenue. You can all notice that there's a big orange chunk, property taxes. Largely the funding for public education comes from property taxes. And the issue with this is people obviously who have more expensive homes pay more property taxes. However, this is a low-income problem area, and this tends to just make the situation worse. For low-income areas, they don't pay a lot of property taxes, the public schools don't get a lot of money, and then the teachers at the low-income areas tend to be either let off, they don't have supplies, they have to deal with 50 plus kids, and then this is why you have areas in LA and stuff where schools are really struggling, and they're the ones that need educators the most, and they don't get to afford them. They don't get them. And educators want to stay out of that area now. They don't even want to go there. Now I'd like to move on to why some of the frustrations of being an educator in California in the public sector. According to WBUR.org, up to half of educators in the public sector in California quit within the first 5 years. Most of it's due to budget issues, job security, they're scared, there's this other, they see everyone else getting fired or pink slipped and they know they can be next. So they want to move out to either, right next door, let's go to Nevada, let's go to Arizona, where they can probably have a job for longer than 2 to 3 years. A testimony from Nicole Miller, a public educator here in California. She describes some of the pressure, she describes, I think in the greatest words, what it's like to be an educator in California. It was this constant: if you don't do better, you're gonna lose your job. Now, that seems pretty much like if you don't do good at your job, you're gonna lose it. However, it's not that they weren't doing good, it's if you don't keep doing better. If teachers are largely looked at in California based on test scores, that's it. So if your students aren't getting high test scores, you're fired. They're gonna hire someone new. However, they won't do that, like I said, they won't do that to seniority members, they'll do that to the new people. Which is why this perpetual spiral of fear of job security for all these new educators just keeps continuing. KTVU.org describes probably the largest frustration of all educators in California: the bureaucracy. Those who quit overwhelmingly cited bureaucratic impediments to teaching, excessive amounts of paperwork, classroom interruptions, and complete restrictions on teaching, not allowing them to do their job they feel is best, which leads to low test scores, which leads to them eventually getting fired. Lastly, I'd like to transition into how this is harmful for California. This failure mentality that a lot of either educators come into, or a lot of, as you guys can obviously in high school, how you felt about the education system, how you saw how some of your teachers were either lackluster, they were scared, they just didn't put a lot of effort because they realized, I might just get fired. Let's start with the low-income areas, the ones that maybe we're not too familiar with, but the big cities, LA, San Diego. These areas have been hit pretty bad since the Great Recession. Educators keep quitting every year. Students keep suffering, and then schools are starting to close down. Or, specifically in my example, I received a note in my high school saying, if you would like to transfer because your school is not meeting requirements, they're like, test scores are low, you're putting your schools under probation, we'll allow you a free transfer day. Any other public school in your sector. And that was a little weird. I thought my education wasn't going to mean anything because these test scores were low, and they were blaming the educators. A lot of educators got laid off because test scores were low, because teachers were. That's just the mentality that the administration has taken upon educators in California. So if this continues to spiral, this is not something that's going to get any better. This constant fear, this sinkhole, this job, like, new educators don't want to come here. There's a stigma to, like, you either teach in the private sector or you teach at the university level, but you stay away from the public. You stay away from K through 12 in California because, one, it's not very high paying. Two, you have more job security than a job at McDonald's. That's the kind of relation. That's how a lot of these educators feel. So I would like to reinforce some of the ideas that the budget is largely the budget is largely affecting the educators, their supplies, their means to actually do their job. And the administration is using the excuse of that budget to say, well, you're not doing your job, so we're going to cut you. Even though the expectations are high, even though they have to deal with that 20+ kids they shouldn't have to, they're still expected to produce results. And then, how can we all fix this? This is an issue we can all fix. We're all voters. We all pay taxes in some way. This is something we have to vote for. and that we have to help change. We have to help the California public education system, or else it's continue getting worse. We're going to go from 34 back to 47 like we were 2 to 3 years ago. And it's going to get worse and worse. And then, who knows public education in California. Eventually we're going to have a shortage of teachers. We're not going to have anyone to teach our kids. Thank you.
All right, Andrea, what did you think?
I thought it was good. He saved everything that he was going to talk about in his intro, and he did talk about them, and he transitioned into them very well. He reminded us what he talked about, and he included a lot of outside information, and he cited it all. And he had his graphs and stuff that were interesting to look at.
All right.
No.
Top right. Top right.
All right. Sean, it was kind of an odd rhetorical question for an attention device, especially when you had the answer right behind you on the screen. So that was a. How many of you know this? Well, I do, because it's right there. You know, if we were doing a survey, that would be an awkward way of doing it. Your statement of purpose is pretty clear. There's a solid preview, so at the start of the speech, I think you're in pretty good shape. In the body of the speech, you do have a lot of information that you're presenting. Most of it is cited. Some of it seems a little bit inconsistent. I think you get sidetracked on the issue of teacher longevity and those kinds of issues. If there's a demonstration that we have a shortage of teachers and that teachers are leaving, we need a little bit more information on that. The one piece of information that I had was about the number of teachers that leave in the first 5 years, and that didn't sound like it was mostly related to budget. That sounded like it was all those other kinds of issues. So sometimes it seems like it's budget driven, but sometimes it seems like it's about something else, like the tenure issue for older teachers, or for instance the requirements that people have to go through to teach a class. Some of it, I guess, ties into budget, like if you're dealing with the number of kids that you have, but it's not always the number of kids. The amount of paperwork is. My wife is an elementary school teacher. I would hate her job. I mean, it drives me out of my mind, the stuff that she has to do, you know, with all the forms. Just as an example, they have a new report card that they have to do. They have to figure out the math score in a particular way. She got a 19-slide PowerPoint that explains how to write out the kid's math score. 19 pages on how to write the kid's math score. Holy criminy, you know. So I don't blame people for getting the hell out of those jobs, you know. But I don't think that's as much as it is the money issue as it is everybody's. Some of it is directed about, you know, the test scores. We have to worry about the test scores, and the test scores might be tied into money. I think you've got an interesting story where your school was offered, you know, students were offered an opportunity to go to a different school if they wanted to. I guess that's tied into the failure of your school to meet certain qualifications, and so they get that particular option. But it's a very complicated issue because there's so many elements involved, and I think you kind of touch on a lot of the criticisms that are made about schools. But you're making it sound like you're trying to focus particularly on those first year teachers, beginning teachers, that sort of thing, and that's what, what their problems are. And I think sometimes you get off onto some other tangents there, and you could probably focus a little bit more because your speech is a little long. It goes a couple minutes over time. The visuals, they explain some statistical information. That was pretty simple and straightforward. They're not really dramatic. They don't add, they don't make the speech more interesting, but it does make it clear where the money comes from and how much gets spent in comparison to some of the other states there. That's fine. All right, thank you.